The federal government has just emerged from one of the longest shutdowns in modern U.S. history. After 43 days of halted services, furloughed employees, disrupted travel, and delayed benefits, the passage of a new funding bill finally brings a sense of relief. But this reopening comes with mixed emotions: relief for millions who rely on federal services, frustration over the economic and personal damage inflicted, and uncertainty about what comes next. This shutdown was not just a political standoff, it was a national slowdown. Critical services paused, immigration processes stalled, air travel infrastructure weakened, and federal employees spent weeks working without pay or forced into furlough. The timing made the impact even heavier, landing just before the busiest travel period of the year and during ongoing economic pressure from inflation and interest rate uncertainty. What makes this moment even more significant is that public opinion has shifted sharply, showing deep dissatisfaction across political lines. And despite reopening, this bill is only temporary. The clock is already ticking toward another possible shutdown in just 60 days. Agencies, financial markets, and everyday Americans are already bracing for renewed instability if long-term agreements are not reached. Today, let's walk through what the reopening means, the immediate impacts, the economic damage already locked in, how the public is reacting, and why the next 2 months may determine whether the government can avoid repeating this crisis. The federal government has officially reopened after a long 43-day shutdown, one of the most disruptive in recent history. The signing of the funding bill immediately restores government functions that millions rely on. For federal workers, the reopening brings long-awaited relief. Many employees have been furloughed without pay or forced to work without compensation for over 6 weeks. Essential services that had been stretched thin are now able to rebuild normal operations. One of the most critical areas is aviation. Air traffic controllers, who were operating under immense strain, are now fully returning to normal staffing levels, a crucial development with Thanksgiving travel approaching. The aviation system expects to take about a week before traffic flow and staffing return to stable levels. Immigration services also resume important functions, including H-1B LCA processing, PERM evaluations, and E-Verify systems, all of which were stalled during the shutdown and caused significant delays for employers and applicants. This reopening brings immediate relief, but it also highlights how dependent daily life is on a functioning federal system. Now that the government is officially reopened, the first wave of impact will be felt across essential public services. SNAP food assistance is expected to resume within hours, bringing relief to families who were facing uncertainty about their November benefits. Hundreds of thousands of furloughed workers will receive back pay, though the payments could take up to a week to fully process. Agencies are prioritizing these disbursements, but the administrative backlog is significant. Air travel infrastructure is one of the areas that suffered most during the shutdown. The system needs roughly a week before operations can be fully stabilized. Staffing shortages, training delays, and maintenance interruptions all occurred during the shutdown, and returning to normal will take coordinated effort. Across other agencies, from national parks to visa offices to research laboratories, operations are restarting gradually. Many of these departments accumulated weeks of unfinished work, and while the reopening brings relief, catching up will take time. While the government is now back in operation, the economic cost of the 43-day shutdown is significant, and much of the damage is permanent. Current estimates show the shutdown caused between $7 billion and $14 billion in unrecoverable losses. These losses stem from delayed spending, halted contracts, reduced consumer activity, and missed economic output. For comparison, the previous major shutdown, which lasted 35 days, cost the economy about $11 billion, with $3 billion permanently unrecoverable. This shutdown was longer, more disruptive, and came at a time when the economy was already navigating slower growth and persistent inflation concerns. Key government functions were halted or severely disrupted. Major economic data releases were delayed, meaning markets and policymakers lost access to critical information needed to assess the economy. Social benefits faced delays that impacted millions. Federal workers were either furloughed or forced to work unpaid, an approach that damages morale and productivity in ways that can't be easily quantified. Shutdowns are sometimes framed as cost-saving events, but the reality is the opposite. They create inefficiency, disrupt productivity, and weaken the economic foundation. The financial damage doesn't evaporate once the government reopens, it lingers. Key government functions were halted or severely disrupted. Major economic data releases were delayed, meaning markets and policymakers lost access to critical information needed to assess the economy. Social benefits faced delays that impacted millions. Federal workers were either furloughed or forced to work unpaid, an approach that damages morale and productivity in ways that can't be easily quantified. Shutdowns are sometimes framed as cost-saving events, but the reality is the opposite. They create inefficiency, disrupt productivity, and weaken the economic foundation. The financial damage doesn't evaporate once the government reopens, it lingers. The political cost of the shutdown is becoming clear, and public sentiment has shifted decisively. According to the latest AP NORC poll, only about one-third of American adults, just 33%, approve of the government's handling of the shutdown and related negotiations. This low approval reflects frustration that spans across political identities. Even among Republican voters, support has dropped sharply, from 81% earlier this year down to 68%. This is a substantial decline for a group that typically shows strong alignment with the administration. Independent voters, who often determine electoral outcomes, have also shown significant dissatisfaction. Across social media, public forums, and community groups, the sentiment is consistent. People are frustrated by the disruption, the unpredictability, and the economic impact. For many, this shutdown felt less like a political negotiation and more like a form of unnecessary harm imposed on everyday life. This decline in public confidence could shape the administration's leverage going forward, especially as another funding deadline approaches. While the reopening brings temporary relief, it's critical to recognize that the new funding bill is only a stopgap. It does not resolve the underlying disagreements in Congress. Instead, it simply postpones them. In 60 days, the government will once again face the risk of another shutdown if lawmakers fail to reach a long-term budget agreement. The political environment remains highly tense, and both parties are bracing for another potential confrontation. Federal agencies have already begun preparing contingency plans, knowing that the countdown has restarted. Financial markets are monitoring the situation closely, aware that another shutdown could disrupt economic data, consumer confidence, and federal operations once again. This means the relief is temporary, and the uncertainty continues. Over the next 2 months, the negotiations will determine whether the country avoids repeating the very disruption it just emerged from.